Thank you, Honourable Chair. Perhaps we can come back with that after lunch, which will be happening shortly in any event. A question on Site C costs. The Minister will know that Site C wasn't referred to the Utilities Commission, and relatively little public information was provided with regard to cost. So I just had a simple question to start with. How much is it going to cost to build the approach channels, spillway, intakes, and penstocks for the Site C dam?
Minister.
We'll get the number. We're guessing at where the member wants to go with this, but rather than guess, I'll let the member take us there because I'm not sure where he wants to go.
Member.
Well, Honourable Speaker, it's obviously early in the estimates. I mean, last year I asked questions about projects that cost tens of millions of dollars, and BC Hydro wasn't able to come up with any information in response to those answers for months. Basic questions about major spending projects. This is the major spending project at BC Hydro. I think the Minister and I, whatever we think of Site C, would agree on that. These are major cost items. There is a budget, I presume. Every time we FOI that budget, it gets redacted, Honourable Speaker, by BC Hydro. These are major cost items. They've always been provided before until this management, this Liberal Party management of BC Hydro. So I'm asking a basic question on their most major project, and they can't find the answer to that question. Is that what the Minister's telling me?
Minister.
No, thank you, Honourable Chair. That's not what I'm telling the member. I'm telling the member, I guess, two things. Number one, if the items have not been procured yet, we obviously can't put a specific number on things that have not actually gone out to bid yet. That's the first thing. And secondly, when the earlier budgets were done, items like, some people refer to them as soft costs, but they're real costs, inflation, interest, contingency, were separated from the construction budget in lump sums. When the project was approved, it then became necessary for those soft costs to be attributed to the various components of the project. So those costs, the interest, the portion of contingency and inflation, are now apportioned to the specific components of the project. So we want to make sure that we give the member the most accurate information we possibly can on those items that have been procured. We absolutely can do that, and we will do that, and he won't have to wait months and months for it.
Member.
Well, there was a budget for this dam. It was presented in summary to the Joint Review Panel. It was presented. It exists in time and space. In fact, because the Joint Review Panel was in federal jurisdiction, presumably, we actually have it. It's not very detailed. It in fact, couldn't be less detailed, actually. Contrary to the tradition at BC Hydro, less detail, not more detail, was given to the shareholders of BC Hydro on this project, where the cost numbers and the cost estimates by the corporation and by the Liberal government, which ordered the corporation to do the project, are very much in question. Honourable Speaker, they provided those. The Minister talks about allocating contingencies. Honourable Speaker, my question was about the spillway intake and penstock. You do not allocate contingencies on a project to core items. If you don't have those items, it's a hockey rink, not a dam, at $8 billion. Those are core items. You do not allocate contingencies to that item. That is ridiculous and not the meaning of contingency on a project like that. So the suggestion that they're allocating contingencies tells you that they're allocating contingencies for overruns in 2016. It's unbelievable, Honourable Speaker. But what does that budget tell us? The one budget they've let us know. The one budget they've let us know on Site C, Honourable Speaker. They did it to the Joint Review Panel, then they upgraded it to reflect the change from the HST to the PST. It's currently $8.775 billion, and everybody knows, because they knew it the minute the Premier said not a penny more, they knew it was going to be more, Honourable Speaker. They knew exactly at that moment it was going to be more, Honourable Speaker. What did the budget say? Well, Honourable Speaker, it said $1.79 billion, the key item, for, and I'm quoting, an earth-filled dam, approach channels and RCC buttress, spillway intakes, penstock, left bank stabilization, coffer dams, dikes, and diversion tunnels. Honorable Speaker. So what's the contract, the big contract? You know, they have press conferences with green screen. If only we could green screen a budget that's actually on budget, Honorable Speaker. If only we could green screen that, Honorable Speaker. They have press conferences with green screen on contract announcements on this project, Honorable Speaker. And what did their major contract give? $1.7 billion for the construction of earth-filled dam, 2 diversion tunnels, roller compacted concrete foundation for the generating station and spillways, Honorable Speaker. In other words, Honorable Speaker, they spent all of the money under that budget item. They've already spent it, and it doesn't include spillway, intake, and penstock, Honorable Speaker, which a reasonable person, having viewed actual information, not recent information from BC Hydro, but actual information would know, costs at least $750 million. So that's how much they're over budget on that item. Already, it's 2016. Things coming into force in 2024, Honorable Speaker. They've spent all the money in that line item, and they haven't, and orphaned are the spillway intake and penstock, Honorable Speaker. So I'm simply asking, by asking how much those things cost, how much BC Hydro is over budget on the Site C project.
Minister.
I think, thanks, Honourable Chair. I think we can have the breakdown. I'm sure it won't satisfy the member, and it is awfully early in the process for anybody to be getting hysterical at this point. But we'll get that number for him, or those numbers for him. I think we can have them for sure early this afternoon, hopefully right after the lunch break. The member is incorrect to suggest that you don't apportion contingency to the components of the project. Contingency costs are apportioned, so is inflation, so is interest. And I'm going to repeat myself because I think it's important. When the budget was first announced, and there was all kinds of detail, if the NDP wanted to, they could still go on the website. There was, I think we delivered a 50-some-odd page PowerPoint presentation when we announced that we were going to go forward with the project, and there's all kinds of budget information there for them to look at. As I said a minute ago, those so-called soft costs had not been apportioned yet, which I am advised is a normal way of doing things. Once the project starts being built, you then have to apportion these costs to the individual items, and it's that reconciliation that has been done that we don't have right here at our fingertips, which we are going to get for the member. And it would be great if we could get it before lunch so that he would have the time to go over it while he's having lunch.
Member.
Well, Honourable Speaker, the fact of the matter is that, I mean, I'm not sure what information people bring to these sorts of things, but that information is not in those, on that website, not in those documents, right? I mean, it wasn't provided. Interestingly, and I know that the minister is a student of history, Honourable Speaker, and always interested to hear about hysteria from him, but he's a student of history, Honourable Speaker, and he'll know that this isn't the first time that BC Hydro has tried to build Site C. And on the previous occasions, they put forward analysis, and they specifically said on those occasions, both in 1981, when they tried to build it, Honourable Speaker, the minister will know, and then in 1987, where they allocated costs to all those detailed items and provided them to the public. So it sounds like it's looking optimistic as I keep talking, that the minister may have an answer to this question. It's a pretty basic question. They spent all of the budget for that item, and they don't have a dam. This is the budget that they presented to the Joint Review Panel and then presented to the public of British Columbia. They've allocated in their first contract all of the expenditures in that item. and they haven't allocated any dollars, $0, to things essential to the dam happening. It wouldn't be a dam if they didn't acknowledge that. So I guess it sounds like the minister may have a response, and I look forward to getting it.
Minister.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. We'll provide a one-page document to the member here shortly, which I suspect he's seen, he's familiar with. At least I'm pretty sure he's familiar with it. But we think, and if we're wrong about this, the member will tell us, but we think that the member is trying to bundle components of the project together and ask, what's the budget for that? When some of those components have not been bid out yet. So Hydro has not, the member may never have worked in the commercial world. Member asks whether we have a budget or not. The chair actually has run businesses, so he'll know what I'm talking about. There is obviously a global budget for things, but when you're going to tender out these components worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, you don't want to tip your hand to prospective bidders on how much you've got in your budget for these particular items. So we'll give the member global numbers for dam and associated structure, power facilities, off-site works, construction management, temporary services, and infrastructure. And he will no doubt want to drill into that. And to the extent that the components that we're talking about have been bid out and Hydro has a contract for those components, we can talk specific dollars. To the extent that those components have not yet been bid out, we're not going to talk specific dollars and put BC Hydro in an unfavorable position when they do go out to bid on these components.
Member.
Honourable Chair, I mean, to describe that as utter nonsense is to be generous, Honourable Speaker. I mean, in 1981, for example, what do we have from BC Hydro? Estimate of capital costs. Now, this is the difference, Honourable Speaker. In the 1980s, there's a Premier, Bill Bennett, or maybe for the purposes of this thing, William Richards Bennett, Honourable Speaker, and there's a BC Utilities Commission on this project. So BC Hydro had to go and make the case for its costs before the Utilities Commission and the Utilities Commission process. And they tried to do that. And I can tell you the Utilities Commission was very critical of Hydro for its performance, I think it's fair to say. And the Premier today rejected a project that was a bad decision. The minister just said it was a bad decision, Honourable Speaker. Just to show, because this will be familiar to him, Honourable Speaker, here's what BC Hydro said about demand and load forecasts, because on the Site C dam, they're exaggerating demand and load forecasts to justify the dam. In the 1981 process, here's what they said, Honourable Speaker. The demand for energy was going to increase 5.6% a year every year for 20 years. That was their 20-year load forecast then, Honourable Speaker. 300% is how much they said the load forecast was going to grow, and on that basis, we justify Site C. You know how much the load forecast grew? 27%. In other words, they were monumentally wrong and would have dramatically undermined the financial stability of BC Hydro had they gone ahead, had there not been a Utilities Commission and a government that said no to them at the time, Honourable Speaker. At that time, they provided, and again in 1987, when they proposed Site C entirely for export, which is what this government is doing now, Honourable Speaker, they again proposed it. And what did they say? Spillway in that case, Honourable Speaker, they provided specific numbers for the spillway, specific numbers for the power intakes and penstocks. That number was $164.2 million, Honourable Speaker, adding the two items together. So why can't BC Hydro provide that today? It has no effect on the bidding, Honourable Speaker. It's absurd to say that we can't tell the public the truth because it affects the bidding. They have a line item. They're the ones who bundled things in the line item. They spent all the money in the line item. So by definition, everything over that, everything they haven't bid out in that line item, puts them over budget. So I'm just asking why they're over budget. And the decision to assign contingencies in 2016 and pretend when contingencies are things for geotech problems and other things on this kind of project, and we've seen other projects, Honourable Speaker, is absurd, Honourable Speaker. They said what these things would cost. They said they could deliver those things, and they have been completely, so far, unable to do so within the budget that they told the Joint Review Panel they were operating under. So very simple, Honourable Speaker. The minister's talking about is bundling them up again. Is the minister prepared to tell the people of BC what these items, which they said were covered in the $1.79 billion, Honourable Speaker, which they said were covered in there, what those items cost? There has to be a budget for those items. There was in 1981, there was in 1987, it wasn't Qatar Hydro, it was BC Hydro then, it's BC Hydro now, and we want to know basic information. So will the minister tell us that basic information?
Minister.
I think probably the best thing to do for the member so that he can relax a little bit is for me to give him this piece of paper through you, Honourable Chair, and then, this afternoon he may wish to ask, to drill down with some of these numbers. The member makes so many incorrect comments, it's astounding, actually. He clearly doesn't know anything about business or budgets or financial matters. Otherwise, he wouldn't be saying the ridiculous things that he's saying. What really, if the member wants to throw insults back and forth, I mean, what really made absolutely no sense was when the government of British Columbia invested in a power plant in Pakistan. I wonder if the member who's asking the questions was advising the government at that time. That was a really dumb thing to do, Honourable Chair. I just needed to get it in. I just wanted to make sure. Maybe I'll get to repeat it. Maybe I'll get to repeat it, Honourable Speaker. So the components of this project, as they are bid out, we know what they cost exactly, Honourable Chair. And what I can tell the member, not that he cares about having the facts that don't meet his political agenda or narrative, is that the project actually is on time and on budget. And the member's going to have, well, the NDP are going to have egg on their face about a lot of things, Honourable Chair, this being one of it, LNG being another. But we'll give him the paper, and he can play around with it as much as he wants to, and we'll do our best to, if he actually has any questions, we'll do our best to provide answers to him. While I'm on my feet, the meeting that the member asked about in September, the attendees were Peter Lanton, President, Council of the Haida Nation, Trevor Russ, Vice President, Council of the Haida Nation, Ken Ray, Chief Councillor, Old Masset Village Council, Cecil Brown, Councillor, Old Masset Village Council, Chris O'Reilly, Deputy CEO, BC Hydro, and Rohan Soulsby, Director, Business and Economic Development, BC Hydro. Those were the list of attendees at that meeting.
Member.
So I'll just ask a question. The minister asked if we had any questions. We have a very simple one, Honourable Speaker. What is the budgeted cost for the spillway intake in Penstock? Is it the minister's position, as is suggested here, that BC Hydro is not prepared to answer even that basic question here about the cost of Site C? Like, why would they not be prepared to answer that question when BC Hydro has consistently answered those questions in past efforts to bring Site C to British Columbia? Is he saying, because this document, of course, doesn't say anything of the sort, Honourable Speaker, is he saying that BC Hydro and the Liberal government is refusing to answer basic questions about the cost of Site C? If he is, and that's his answer, then that's fine, I guess, Honourable Speaker. But people can judge that. Why BC Hydro once chose to tell the truth about such things, and now it doesn't want to answer those things. they can explain it. That's their position. But I can't think of a more basic question to ask in estimates about a project that hasn't been reviewed by the Utilities Commission.
Minister.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. Well, let me try this. See if I can get through to the member. When you're looking to buy a house or condominium, often your realtor will ask you, well, what's your budget? And you think to yourself, do I really want my realtor to know what my budget is? Because whatever my budget is, they're going to try to sell me a house for the top number of my budget. That's the same thing when you buy a car. It's exactly the same thing. When you go onto the car lot, the car salesperson says, what's your budget? Honourable Chair, could you please instruct the boo birds on the other side to allow me to answer questions? This is estimates. It's not question period. It's the same thing with the car, Honourable Chair, and I'm trying to bring this down to earth so that the members on the other side can understand it. When you go onto the car lot, you don't want the
Members.
you don't want the car salesman to know what your budget is. So what the member is suggesting BC Hydro do in this case is to tell those who have not yet bid on some of these components how much money they have in the kitty to spend on those components. So what do you think those people, those companies who are going to bid are going to do? They are going to look at how much is in there, and they are going to bid the absolute maximum amount. Now, is that a responsible thing for BC Hydro to do to its ratepayers? Or should BC Hydro be trying to procure all of these elements, all of these components of this big project at the lowest possible price? That is what they're doing. That is why we cannot get into a specific number for items that have yet to be procured. It is common sense. Anybody who's ever been in business knows it's common sense. It is only the NDP who don't get it.
Member.
Yeah, the NDP and the Social Credit Party and every other government before this, this is not a private purchase of a house. It's a major public project. The Premier has said it won't cost any more than $8.775 billion. That's what the Premier has said. And we're asking questions about that matter. And what the Minister is saying expresses no faith or understanding of what competitive bidding is at all, I don't think, Honourable Speaker. I know that his suggestion would only be true if there was one bidder, Honourable Speaker. He doesn't know what competitive bidding is at all. And he's saying that they were wrong in 81 and they were wrong in 87, not NDP governments, Honourable Speaker, social credit governments that decided to tell the public the truth about a project. They were wrong and he's right. Well, okay, that's his discussion, but it doesn't change the fact, Honourable Speaker, that on this key budget item, which, by the way, is not a fixed price contract. It's not a fixed price contract. The contract we're talking about, the $1.75 billion is not a fixed price contract. That's why it says in their announcement, approximately $1.75 billion, which, given the minister's 50-30 formula, Speaker, that we all remember, it could be 50% more or 30% less, could take us almost anywhere, Honourable Speaker. Fact is, there's reasons for that. The reason it's not a fixed price contract is there's something called contingencies. You don't actually know the impact of building such a dam and the consequence of building such a dam, the technical difficulties of doing so until you're there. And so obviously it's not a fixed price contract to move that much earth, right? Not a fixed price contract. So the minister is saying, because he doesn't want to tip off the competitive bidders, that he can't tell the public the truth about the overrun on Site C, because there is an overrun on Site C, Honourable Speaker, compared to what they told the federal government in the Joint Review Panel, and compared to what they told the public when they announced it. There's an overrun. And so I'm just determining and trying to determine with the minister, through basic questions that past governments have provided, that information. And can the minister say, if the minister is making allegations about not knowing business, why it was appropriate for the social credit government in 1981 and again in 1987 to provide such basic information, and why BC Hydro and he won't do so today?
Minister.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. I'm going to try one more time with a different example. to try to get through to the member on this, and so that he can understand why you can't publish or publicize your budget for items that have not yet been procured. If the member goes on to BC Bid and looks at all the bids there, he will never, I would think, see a budget for the seller, for whatever government agency is bidding out something. You don't want those who are going to bid on providing a service or product to know how much money you have before they bid. It is only common sense. For those items that have been bid out, obviously, we know exactly to the dollar how much those components cost. I can tell a member he won't accept it, and that's his right. But I can tell a member the Site C project is not over budget. In fact, the Site C project is looking very, very good right now.
Member.
8 years to go, and they've allocated all of the contingency, but it's looking good. It's looking good, Honourable Chair. It's looking fantastic. Honourable Chair, the fact is, I think it's really disgraceful. And I'll leave the minister in suspense about what is disgraceful until after we vote.